Welcome to Too Good to Be True, an investigative podcast about exposing the scams, schemes, and financial cults trying to separate you from your money. Well, hello and welcome back.
Hello.
So I am Julia Lorenz Olson. I am your co-host, and I'm a accredited financial counselor and a co-creator on PBS's 2 Cents.
And I am co-host Ryan Houlihan. I am a journalist and drag artist in New York City.
All right. Are we ready for like a little hint of what we're going to talk about today?
Yes, please. What are we doing?
Okay. Buckle up.
Cars. Beep, beep.
Beep, beep, beep. So we were talking about cars in a broader sense, car culture, and how it's really kind of impacted the world that we live in. Now, I kind of come from a car background. I mean, my father worked in the car business for almost my entire life. I grew up around cars. I remember our first one that we had as a family when we moved to the States. I mean, it was this tank of like a rusty red Volvo. And I have very distinct memories every time we got a new car. I remember when we got a green station wagon and being so excited to sit in the back.
Oh, heck yes.
I would pretend that it was like a limousine and the driver couldn't see me, and I would just like get up to shenanigans in the back. And honestly, I live in a place where owning a car is basically unessential. I mean, You can't get from place to place on public transportation with any sort of reliability where I live.
I would be trapped. I don't drive. And I had my license. It's since expired and I never renewed it because I don't drive. But I grew up, my parents had cars. I did not take public transit ever. And we coveted new cars. We were obsessed with getting new cars. And when we did, it was a big event. And we would only get a new one every like 5 years. And it would be my dad's car and then my mom's car and then my dad's car and then my mom's car. We would replace them like that. And I didn't really think about the fact that I didn't love driving or the amount of work and responsibility a car is. So now I live without a car and I live in a very walkable place, but that's by choice. And I pay, a very different...
a different kind of cost.
A different kind of cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm kind of at a time in my life, I'm more sort of into my financial journey, as it were. And I've done this a couple of times where I'm like, okay, how did I get here? I just kind of like looking at my net worth and all the things that I have at this point in my life. And I realized how incredible it was to basically be gifted 2, albeit super, super cheap cars from family at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Like the fact that happened to me and for me was pivotal in me being able to like retain the money that I was gifted like at our wedding in order to put it towards a down payment because I didn't have to pay for a car. So a car really represents a very large financial commitment for people, and it can kind of make or break a budget in many ways.
And as a required investment, it's not like most people can opt out of considering.
No, exactly. And so where we are now, the fact that I live in a place that I basically don't have much of a choice. That didn't happen by accident. And car culture is so deeply ingrained, and it is having a really large impact, not only on just like the individual finances of people who own them or don't own them, but they're also having kind of a cultural and environmental effect on us as a whole.
So how did this happen? Like who caused all of this? Who can I blame?
Yeah. All right. So let's run it back, as they say. Our obsession with cars really was not inevitable. The first automobile was invented in Germany and France over in the late 1800s. But America pretty quickly came to dominate the sort of automotive industry in the first half of the 20th century, thanks to Henry Ford. Where he basically innovated these mass production techniques that became standard. And then you have the growth of basically the big 3. You have Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. And these are enormous industries, employing at sometimes millions of people. And it was a huge part of what America was producing at the time. Now, after 1920, you're not seeing quite as big a growth in car ownership because a lot of those resources were being diverted for military uses, right?
Plus, like lifestyle stuff has a certain like how you're living, where we're living has a certain inertia to it. So these kind of changes take time.
Exactly. And most people at that time, pre-1920, are living in very concentrated, areas, very concentrated population areas like cities, right? But post-World War II, you see a dramatic economic boom, right? That's where the baby boomers come from. And as a result, there was a massive investment in the building of highways. So in 1947, Congress actually authorized the construction of a 37,000-mile chain of highways.
Congress used to do stuff, man.
Yeah, it's true. And these highways allowed people to start leaving these centers where they were, and they were largely white families. They started to capitalize on the systemic economic advantages that have been handed to them certainly over centuries. But at this time, you have the FHA, promoting very racially segregated housing. And so cars were basically how white families were like, see ya, don't want to live next to Black folks anymore. And you have what's known as white flight.
Terrifying. And also like something I'm very familiar with because I grew up on Long Island, which is like one of the ground zero areas during this period for the building of suburbs.
Yes.
And you can really see how these policies have over the course of decades echoed and still basically assert, like redlining asserts its dominance across the demographics of Long Island, whether, no matter how much change has taken place economically or in any other respect. So you've really set up the amount of highways and the necessity of how we're living now, that kind of like inertia that was keeping people in cities is also keeping people in suburbs and keeping people segregated.
So basically, however you design a city, whether that's on racial lines, with highways, zoning laws, the ways that we try to control how land is used and how people can get to and from places have massive unintended effects. An expert on this topic is Dave Amos, who is an assistant professor at the Department of City and Regional Planning at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, as well as the producer of City Beautiful, a YouTube channel that I love about cities and city planning. Let's let Dave inform us a bit about our love affair with cars and what happened when we started zoning around that.
Cars in the US solved a big problem. So back in the Model T 4 days, cities weren't that great to live in. They were often pretty dark and smelly. People had to live pretty close to where they worked. We saw that with the streetcar suburbs, people could live a little bit farther out, but there's this perception that the cities weren't that great, but cars gave us the opportunity as Americans to spread out and live farther away from where we worked in places that were leafier, had all sorts of clean air, fresh air. So it was really appealing. And cars, as they became more affordable, became, a way for folks to leave the city. Folks, typically white and middle class or higher, to leave the city and sort of experience that lifestyle. And it was very attractive. I mean, cars sort of have this built-in advantage where it opens up quite a lot of land to you to move, to live in, to shop, to go to work, because you can drive fairly fast and you can go wherever you want. You're not reliant on fixed routes like a streetcar or a bus. So the freedom aspect was appealing. I think culturally for Americans, they love that. Zoning codes in the US were based on a pretty sound idea initially, right? That we don't want people living next to noxious odors emanating from factories. That makes a lot of sense. But when we combine that with cars, you get this idea that separation of uses needs to be everywhere. It needs to be very extreme. And it can be very extreme because you can get from one zone to the other relatively easy with a car. And thus, since the advent of the car, we haven't really needed to zone for mixed uses because we assume that everybody's just going to drive to the different zones. And now we're dealing with cities where there's just not a lot of areas zoned for mixed use other than our sort of main historic central cities. It's very strange that even when we're sort of designing for mixed use, we're also still designing for the car. And then every parking space still takes away from more housing or more retail or things that would actually make it more appealing. So it's a problem.
So you couldn't really get things like Levittown without this push for highways being built and this mass production that's now happening. So Arthur Levitt brought kind of mass production techniques to suburban home construction, essentially. And so his company would build as many as 150 homes a week in these very highly segregated planned communities in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and they were all named Levittown, which is kind of crazy. And then soon after that, other developers started following his lead, and they would basically buy up huge swaths of what was at the time pretty cheap farmland around urban areas so that white families that were living in urban areas at the time could migrate out. And a lot of these people were financing their homes with mortgages from the FHA, right?
This was also during a time like culturally we were defining the nuclear family and really isolating people in that way. And so you need a place, you want a place to stay.
You need a place to isolate. And I want to make like really clear, like places like Levittown, they weren't segregated just because we were in like a more racially segregated time. Their contracts, when you bought them, contained covenants that restricted occupancy by any, quote, members other than the Caucasian race. I mean, that's literally how explicit this was. Only white people can buy here.
And this happened within people alive today's lifetimes. So let's not act like, I don't want anyone at home thinking this is like a tale of yore. The effects of this are still very contemporary.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in places that didn't have that clause, these FHA loans that are backed by the federal government were hardly ever given to Black and brown folks. So the federal government is seeing all this movement, right? And so in 1956, they passed the Federal Highway Act, also known as the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act, which was signed by Eisenhower, and it called for the construction of about 41,000 miles of highway over 13 years, with most of the funding coming from the federal government. Now, I can tell you, I didn't pick up on this when I was looking at this, but then a friend was like, did you notice a word in there? Defense.
Yeah.
Defense. So not only are highways, like they're not building highways just for like the good of its citizens. They were also very specifically crafted and created to be able to move large amounts of troops in a very efficient manner. This was a part of like the military industrial complex, essentially. I mean, you have Eisenhower, right, who was looking at what happened in World War II and seeing how German troops were able to move around so much more easily than we would have here. And he brings that back.
Ultimately, you're taking tons of tax dollars being paid by everyone at every social class and then only benefiting people who can afford cars.
Who can afford the cars.
Which is made even easier when you're given loans and opportunities to build generational wealth that other people aren't given.
It just all feeds itself.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's just kind of nasty feedback loop. So what ends up happening is like, so in 1950, there were only 25 million cars registered in the country at the time. And just 10 years later, by 1960, that figure had more than doubled to like 67 million. That's an enormous change, right? I mean, 67 million, I was like looking this up, it represented about 36% of the population at that time. And that's when you get that visual of that nuclear family having a house with a garage and a yard, and boom, now you have this very specifically branded American dream, right?
Yeah. Especially to a group of people coming out of the world events that they had been in. It sounds like the happy ending. And of course, everyone would jump on it if given the chance.
Yeah.
I would jump on it today if given the chance. It sounds like stability.
Exactly. It absolutely does. And as you can see, this creates another negative feedback loop for public transit funding. I mean, they could have taken all of this money and be like, you know what, we're going to build rail lines, just highly efficient rail lines across this entire country. But that is not what they do, right? And so what happened is like the fewer people who are now taking trains and buses to get back into the city, the less funding there is reserved for it, et cetera.
And it's going to be lower income people that are doing this. So when things like fare raises go up, that's the people who get hit. It's all part of a whole, and it's so
gross. It's gross. For more about public transit, we spoke to Chris Wells, who's a professor of environmental studies at Macalester College and the author of Car Country, an environmental history. Maybe Chris can tell us why public transportation isn't profitable enough to exist.
I'll give you some context for thinking about it. One is you can ask the same question of highways. Are highways profitable? What is that even? It's not a question that computes, right? We spend so much money on highways and car-based infrastructure, and no one thinks it should be profitable. What would it even mean for it to be profitable? Another way of thinking about it is historically, the public transportation systems in the United States were not actually created to be profitable. They were created by suburban developers to make their real estate investments profitable. Basically, the way things worked was a streetcar company would form, usually by real estate interests who owned holdings out in suburban areas they wanted to develop. They would approach the city and ask for what was called a franchise agreement. And what that meant was they made a deal with the city to allow them to lay their tracks. And these are privately owned tracks, privately maintained tracks, privately owned and operated streetcar companies that are designed to make money. These are not publicly owned and operated systems originally. So they get a franchise as part of being granted exclusive rights to use the right-of-way, which vastly inflates the worth of their suburban real estate so that when they start selling off lots, because there's a regular transportation link, the land is worth exponentially more, right? So it pays for itself to pay for the transportation system, to put in all that infrastructure and then even to operate it. And in exchange, the city governments would say, yes, you can use the rights of way, but what we demand is low fares. So a nickel fare flat rate, anyone can ride as far as they want at that fixed cost. And the streetcar companies are like, great, like that helps us generate traffic. And there was a famous saying from one of the streetcar operators that the strap hangers pay the dividends. And what he meant by that was jamming as many people onto a streetcar that's running the route regardless is what generates the profits. So there was actually an incentive based on how all those contracts were structured for streetcars to operate often enough that people could rely on them, but not so often that they weren't totally jammed full every time one came by, because that's how nickel fares, where you could ride as far as you wanted, ended up generating profits. But where they went was from downtown to the suburban bedroom communities. They went back and forth that way. They weren't designed as a transportation system to help people get around a densely settled area. They were designed for the purposes of dispersing the urban population out into the suburbs by the people who were making a killing on selling land to the new suburban residents. So as a transportation system, our early streetcar system wasn't very good. And there were enough coming in this sort of radial hub and spoke pattern into downtowns that if you were downtown, you could probably get across downtown, maybe with some inconvenient transfers. But if everything was kind of densely packed, you could kind of get close and then walk the rest of the way. But they were never designed as transportation systems. So one question is, what if we actually designed public transportation as a transportation system instead of on a hub and spoke model? And actually, most modern transportation systems look more like that than not. And that leads to the second point. That is that for a public transportation system to work effectively, you need quite a lot of riders. The way that planners put this is mass transit requires mass. It's expensive to own and operate far-flung transportation systems. Just ask a highway builder. It's expensive. And some routes generate a lot of excess riders and profits. And other routes, because they don't have as much ridership, operate at a loss. And so they really only work at the level of a system. And so if you talk to transit planners, a big part of what they're trying to balance is how much service can we provide on routes that aren't going to pay for themselves by providing services where there's going to be some profitability. That's a really complicated thing to do, and my hat's off to transit planners who do it, especially competing with the ease of car-based transportation.
You'd have to be a real dum-dum to think that the point of a public transportation system is to make someone money. If that was the case, we wouldn't need it to be publicly owned. But I guess hindsight is 2020 and everyone just wanted that new car smell.
Yeah. And now I will say not everybody at the time was like super happy about this highway development. There were a lot of people who were protesting it. And there are a few instances of some white neighborhoods basically successfully blocking highways in their area. And I mean, this still happens today.
NIMBY stuff.
Yeah, it's still like, not in my backyard. So have you ever heard this phrase, quote, America's love affair with cars? Have you ever heard that? I have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that actually came from a very specific place, and it's propaganda. I mean, there's really no other way to say it. So it was actually used in a 1961 infomercial that was called like Merrily We Roll Along on NBC. It was sponsored by DuPont, which owned a big stake in General Motors. And it was this it really truly was like this long infomercial. It was hosted by Groucho Marx, and he called the car the new girl in town, right? And basically kind of framing it as like, there's this new beautiful girl in town, and now we are married to her. Like, there's a marriage between us and cars.
That is unsettling and creepy and weird.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Groucho Marx himself also promoted this car line from Chrysler, which was like a sponsor of a game show that he hosted called You Bet Your Life. So Groucho Marx was in it.
He was a SpawnCon girl.
Yeah, exactly. So now I do want to say, like, we've always attached kind of our mode of transportation to status, right? I mean, going back way before cars, you have horses, right? And different breeds of horses.
Even classes of boats.
Yeah.
Kinds of trains.
Absolutely. This is not new to use a mode of transportation as a signal of your status. It's a lot harder to do that with public transport, things you don't own, right? Can't make your own.
Cinderella didn't get a bus ticket.
No, exactly. Like the light rail is not like a style statement on my part.
Although thank you to places like Instagram for making the subway a vibe and an aesthetic, because it gave me a lot of unearned glamour in my early 20s.
Yes. But how deeply we associate cars with status, I think, is still very much a product of ongoing propaganda.
Okay.
So you have kind of two forms. You have overt propaganda, which is car advertising, right? I mean, how many
professional driver
ads for cars have you seen? And get this. So I had no idea how much car companies are actually spending on car advertising. So in the first 7 months of 2022, which was last year, car companies spent $4.8 billion on advertising. That's not making the cars. That's not paying their people.
That's Super Bowl commercial.
This is absolutely. This is just on advertising what they're making. And then you have companies also spending billions to have their cars placed in like movies. So I was not like into the whole Twilight thing. I don't know if you were, but I remember this watching clips or whatever when it was starting to come out. There was a Volvo Like,
yes. Yeah.
whatever his name, was it Edward the
Yes.
vampire? He owns this very specific Volvo brand.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that brand blew up. Like, that specific make and model blew up.
A few things from those movies were like very central products that were given iconography status, Ray-Bans and the Volvo. And I never thought about it. I guess now I would know, but at the time I was 20 years old, max or something. And I saw this and I was like, how was I supposed to know that was an ad? I just thought it was a cool car.
Yeah. And then when you get into series, so like the new Jurassic Park series, they have a sponsorship with Mercedes. Black Panther has Lexus. Yeah, it's crazy. And these are very specifically designed to advertise, to a certain demographic that is watching these movies. You have
It's valuable real estate.
Very valuable real estate. I also can't tell you how much celebrity car content there is out there.
Yeah.
Like, in researching this, there are entire articles written about a celebrity buying a car or getting into, like, Kylie Jenner shows off her car collection. And that's like it's a whole thing. It's like Cribs, but for cars, right?
I mean, the idea of paparazzi, they're going to record what you're getting in and out of. So it's like built in that you're going to be seen in this way. And even before social media, you know what I mean?
It is good content. I mean, conspicuous consumption is like,
so watchable. I mean, who doesn't want to watch rich people run around? You should see my husband watch Real Housewives every week. Watching him watch those women spend money is like watching a toddler try ice cream. And we do it multiple times a week. But there has to be other kinds of lifestyles that we could covet or like fetishize or make sexy. A car-based lifestyle is increasingly not even what anyone wants. And unlike Elon Musk, maybe we could start shaping that messaging to be something that appeals to anyone besides men, white men mostly. Which I think anecdotally is what most car advertising is shooting for. Dave Amos has some ideas about the largest group of people that this might actually appeal to.
I think one of the most poignant critiques of the suburbs has actually come from feminism. In the 1970s, Dolores Hayden wrote all about the isolating forces of the suburbs on women, particularly in the 60s and 70s, where a family might only own one vehicle, and that was used by the breadwinner to go into the city to the office job, and the suburban housewife was left alone, often with small children and no one to speak with. There was very little community there, maybe outside of your cul-de-sac, right? How do you get anywhere? And that the suburbs really don't work for somebody who doesn't have a car, and it can be incredibly isolating. And I think, to continue that farther, today we're seeing that the largest growth of households are single women living alone. That's where we're seeing the most growth compared to like in the past, right? So the nuclear family is no more, or like it's in decline as a sort of household type. And of course, the suburbs are sort of meant for a nuclear family. But if you're a single woman living alone, typically a 3 to 4 bedroom house, 2,000 square feet, is probably not the right size of a house for you. And, it's just not a great place. And that's the thing. I think lots of us city planners just want to see a diversity in housing types, of neighborhood types, right? The idea that we all could find a home in the suburbs is a concept that is antiquated. And we're seeing this in terms of housing prices, right? We're seeing high costs for housing in central cities and hip neighborhoods because people want to live there. And there's a scarcity because, again, we have not been building those neighborhoods, but we're seeing households where that would be a better fit. And right now, the suburbs don't offer that. Now, for some folks who are nuclear families, the suburbs still may be a good fit. But I also think that we need to be thinking about this as, if you live in the suburbs, it doesn't have to be a forever thing, right? If you're young and in your 20s and you want to live in a city somewhere cool, do that. If you want to raise kids in the suburbs, spend your 30s and 40s and 50s there and then move back to the city as an active senior, right? Like, you don't have to live in one place all the time. So the suburbs may serve a purpose for some, but increasingly we need to be thinking more diverse.
The people yearn for change. They just need to know how they can get it. We need to somehow make it a cool Instagram or TikTok trend for celebrities to take public transportation. Like, sometimes you see it around the Oscars and it'll be like, oh, this celebrity just took the LA subway to the Oscars. That's so cool. And we love it. But we need more of that, because we see a lot of Transformers at the movie theaters. I'd like to see Megan Fox off the hood of a sports car and maybe on a city bus looking glamorous and sexy with the wind in her hair, listening to her music, not thinking about driving or gas prices. My celebrity car story, however, is I once saw Tony Shalhoub hail a cab. He was very sexy in person.
So I actually have a celebrity car story for you.
Oh, please.
So I was in high school at the time, 17, living in Houston, Texas. And I'm in a show, a musical with some other high schoolers. And I'm in the back of this car, and we have a break between our matinee performance and our evening performance. So we get on the highway to go to one of my co-star's house. And we're going, and I'm just looking out the back, and I see this amazing car. And I'm looking at this car, and I'm like, oh, that's a Bentley. Damn, I mean, this thing is shining. It is gleaming. It's beautiful. And then I look at the person driving it, and I was like, oh my God, she's beautiful. And in that split second, that's all it took, my friend yells out, that's Beyonce. And it was fucking Beyonce in her Bentley. But just goes to show you, Beyonce is everything to me. But I noticed the car.
Yeah.
First, I noticed the car first, before I noticed it was freaking Beyonce. And she was in it with her mother, Tina, and she had these huge earrings on, and we waved, and she waved back at us, and I about lost my damn mind.
That's car propaganda for me. If Beyonce likes it.
Listen, I will, I took the top off of my Maybach. I mean, hello.
Oh my God.
She talks about it all the time, and I will ingest it. As long as she is making it, I will ingest it.
I wanted a white SUV in high school because Britney Spears had one, and she always made sure to have a white SUV. And I thought, that's so glamorous. And now I know so many people with white SUVs, and I'm like, all these millennial mothers, I think that they maybe absorbed that message.
Oh my God. I have a white SUV.
See?
I do.
See?
You watch you watch My Prerogative or Toxic, and you're
Listen, it's a very used Subaru Highlander, and I like
I'm
it.
sure it's very glamorous. Speaking of glamorous, guys, we're going to miss you. We're going to miss you. This is the final episode of the season. And the only way we're going to be able to do season 3 is if you can support us by joining the Society at TFD. Now, this isn't a hard sales pitch. I am not trying to pressure you into spending money you don't have, but the Society has some great benefits that you might want to enjoy, and it is the best way to support the show and to ensure we get to keep doing what we love, bopping these gurus and snake oil salesmen on the head like we're playing whack-a-mole. We could do this forever, but we need your support. So to hear a bit more about the Society at TFD, let's hear from you know her, you love her, she needs no introduction, Chelsea Fagan.
Hey guys, it's Chelsea here, and I'm just popping in to let you know about the Society at TFD, our exclusive members-only community available to join here on our YouTube channel, as well as on Patreon. If you want to support TFD and the special projects we work on, like fan-favorite podcast Too Good to Be True, we'd love for you to join. Giving to TFD directly is the best way to ensure that we can keep making the content you most want from us. The Society is available both on YouTube and Patreon, and before you ask, the membership offerings are very similar on both platforms, so you only need to join one. Some people prefer YouTube, so join us there. Prefer Patreon? Join us there. And since you guys have been asking for clarification, here's a breakdown of what you guys get for each tier on each platform. On YouTube, our membership tiers are $2.99 and $4.99. For $2.99, you get loyalty badges and moan emojis on YouTube, 40% off TFD digital events, monthly office hours with Chelsea, access to our Discord community, access to our monthly book club, and access to our questions answered by me or guests on the Financial Confessions. For $4.99, you get everything from the $2.99 tier, plus exclusive ad-free videos each month where you can catch me rant about Dave Ramsey, TikTok face, girl bossing, Goop, and so much more. Entire backlog of ad-free bonus videos, 50% off TFD live digital events on everything from $12 workshops to $199 courses, priority access to get your questions answered by me or guests on the Financial Confessions, And over on Patreon, our tiers are $7 and $12. For $7 a month, you get exclusive ad-free videos each month, our entire backlog of ad-free bonus videos, 50% off TFD live digital events on everything from $12 workshops to $199 courses, monthly office hours with Chelsea, access to our Discord community, access to our book club, automatic enrollment in exclusive Patreon-only newsletters, priority voting on the monthly book club selection, and priority access to get your questions answered by me or guests on the Financial Confessions. For $12, you get everything from the $7 level, plus our weekly Ask TFD Anything newsletter, where you get your personal questions answered by the TFD team. No topic is too small or too big to ask. The Society has something for everyone, so click the link in the description of this episode to join us on your preferred platform.
Now cars are a way to kind of show off your worldview, right?
Yeah.
It's like an extension of yourself, and advertisers are definitely capitalizing on this. So Democrats are more likely to drive sedans and hybrids or EVs. Shout out to my Prius. Yes. Republicans lead in the trucks, luxury, sporty, and family vehicles category.
Interesting. I mean, it's kind of what you would expect, but then you think about like sub-markets, like Subaru probably has a lot of crossover.
Yeah.
Whereas like I would think, Chevy probably doesn't have as much crossover.
Yeah. Like when
That's a
you
guess.
think about it, do you remember their old jingle? It's like a rock. Oh, like a rock. I mean,
Yeah.
like, is that like a Democrat? Like, I just can't
No.
see it. It's just it's branding, It's very specifically branding. So the best-selling vehicle in the entire U.S. is the Ford F-Series pickup.
Oof.
This thing has a median price
Oh no.
of $64,500.
Oh my God. And it's only going to depreciate in value.
Oh, we'll get there. But like just to kind of set the table for the
That's
numbers
crazy. For the
conversation.
average person, or
Yeah.
the median price, for the average person, that is such an enormous, that's a year's income for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And trucks specifically account for about 20% of the U.S. automotive market, which is really crazy.
I do not believe that 20% of people need to be getting trucks. That's definitely a stylistic
Listen,
choice.
if you come to Texas, you will
Maybe.
see on our 4-lane highways. But like, I'm looking at the people driving them and I'm like, are you really using that?
I go to Long Island and I see people with these and I'm like, what are we moving? Really?
Yeah.
You have this much Monster Energy? Listen here, Keith. I don't buy it. So I don't think pickup trucks are the future. I'm going to blow your mind. And I don't think the future is about hybrids. I think we all know it's going to be about the electric car. It looks like the easiest way out of this current problem, or at least onto the next problem. To hear more about this, here's Dave Amos.
I do think that electric cars are the future of cars. I think we're heading that way. We're seeing lots of federal policy in other countries that are indicating that we're going to be in an electrified future by 2035, 2040. We're going to see most cars sold globally electric. That's great. Obviously, we're in a climate emergency. So if the electricity flowing into those new electric vehicles are from clean sources, it's going to make a big impact. Transportation emissions are one of the greatest sources of emissions that we're dealing with when we're talking about the climate crisis. So undoubtedly, that's a win for sustainability. If you're a city planner, though, having electric vehicles solves one problem, but there are many problems caused by cars, and electric vehicles don't solve those. We're talking about things like safety, the space issue. All of those reasons cars are still not great don't go away because they're electric.
I wonder at what point the libertarian tech Republican Miami guys who love Tesla will go to war with the gas guzzling anti-environmentalist forces of the GOP, or will they just ignore the contradiction as, they are wont to do?
I mean, I can definitely say I've never seen like a Bernie sticker on a Ford F-150.
No, I've seen a lot of truck nuts and peeing Calvins, though. No. In my lifetime, I have seen products, brands, types of different, interchangeable formats or whatever become so politicized in a way that they never really have. And cars are a perfect way to do that. I mean, it's such a big part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like when you choose a place to live, a lot of people choose places they live off of political reasons. And I kind of think we all assume that. But when you think about cars, every brand is available to you everywhere,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So it's a very personal choice you get to make.
Yeah.
Of course, it would get tied up in all that.
And of course, I have to shout out to like the very specific crypto bro wing of car purchasing. So this is crazy. Have you heard of G-Wagons? Have you seen these things?
Yes.
They are monsters, first off. But what happened is that when FTX crumbled at the end of 2022, you saw a huge flood of them.
Oh, wow.
Go online for sale. And I mean, these things cost, like basically what was happening is crypto bros were cashing out when things were good, some of their stuff, and then they were buying these G-Wagons. I mean, these things they start at $131,000. They can go up to $250,000, $300,000. So, I mean, I'm just saying, if you have like a couple $100,000 like hanging around and you want to buy a G-Wagon on the cheap, now's the time. Enjoy. But, let's say you're not a crypto bro, right?
Mhm.
And you're trying to figure out, what is owning a car going to cost me? I mean, I've spent so much time in clients in personal sessions just trying to figure out how to buy a car in a way that's not going to rout them financially.
I mean, it's never I'm not going to say never because Jay Leno and Jerry Seinfeld exist. It is never an investment I've seen anyone get a huge return off of.
Yes.
If anything, these are money sinks, right?
Exactly. Exactly. These things are not investments. The way I actually like to frame it to people is think of this as a utility. Because it's
that makes
just
sense.
a pure cost, right? They are a financial triple threat, right? So as you kind of alluded to earlier, they decrease in value.
You
right?
roll that off the lot.
They depreciate in value over time. Then you have the second thing of most people don't buy them in cash. They take out a loan, which then they pay interest on. And I mean, right now, especially, holy moly, interest rates being what they are. Ugh. So you're paying interest. That's number two. And then on top of that, you got to pay to maintain the thing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, shit breaks on these things all
Oil
the
changes,
time.
inspections, brake changes. I mean, all of it is like little costs that add up. And if you don't know what you're doing or you're in desperation for your car back, you're going to be paying top dollar on top of probably not getting a great rate.
Yeah, exactly. So, what are these things really costing people up front? Obviously, we talked about like the Ford, like the median price for that was like $64,000. So the median new car price among all cars was about $42,500 in December of 2022.
That was the price of the most expensive car we were looking at when I was a teenager. And I understand I am older and time has passed and I live in a crypt. But frankly, that is an insane price for a new car.
This is honestly like the number that was the most surprising to me was the average on used cars. You got a guess on that?
Oh God, $12,000?
It's $20,000 to $25,000.
Oh my God.
On a used
car.
On a used car.
You don't even get the smell.
No. And the interest rates right now are at about 6% for new cars. If you're looking at a used car, hold on to your hat, it's 10%.
Oh my God.
10%.
How are people managing this?
And that's only
coast to coast.
That's only if you have a credit score of over 780.
Wow.
Now, if you have like a super high credit score of like over 780, then like maybe you can get it for 5, but still, I mean, 5% interest, that is not nothing.
And if you're in a better financial position, you don't need as much. That is just that it seems like a hole that you can't dig yourself out of if you don't have a car to start with in your life.
Exactly. I think that's the thing is this system, just like real estate, it privileges people who are already in. If you have somewhere to start, you will go farther than somebody who has to start at the true starting block. So let's talk a little bit more about depreciation because I talk to people about this until I am blue in the face. So just to give people a quick idea of what depreciation is, let's say you go to an ice cream store and you buy a fresh ice cream and it's like $5. 20 minutes later, if somebody were like, here's this exact same ice cream, would you like to pay $5 for this? You'd be like,
No, thank you, please.
No thanks. Like the value has dropped over a certain amount of time. And the exact same thing happens with cars. So in the first 5 years of a car's life, it will lose about 40% of its value on average. And 10% of that is lost literally the minute you buy it off the lot, if it's new. And then after that 5-year mark, then it kind of chills out a little bit and you lose about 15% per year after that.
Still crazy.
So yeah, and like knowing this number, I've always bought vehicles that were at least 5 years old because then I know at least half of the depreciation of this thing, somebody else paid for.
Yeah.
Not me, right? And depreciation is very difficult to honestly quantify for people because you don't see it show up as like a line item in your budget.
Well, yeah, I usually just think about like what it's going to cost to maintain a car, not just what I'm losing by owning it.
Exactly. Just for the privilege of owning it, you are losing in value. But let's talk about upkeep because this is another thing that people, I think, vastly underrepresent.
It's not just gas.
No, it's not just gas. So for new vehicles, this is according to AAA. So for new vehicles that are driven about 15,000 miles a year, the average car ownership, just maintenance costs, were just over $10,000 a year. That's like almost $900 a month.
That is really outrageous. And when you think about, I mean, I complain about the cost of public transit a lot, but when you think about it, it's like a drop compared.
I mean, that is nothing. And I mean, I actually recently just looked at my budget line item for gas, what I spent in gas in total. So now I live in the suburbs. I have older vehicles and I have a hybrid. In 2020, it was like $150 a month what I was spending in tolls, which like, hello, we didn't even talk about tolls. Maybe that's a whole other.
Yeah, no, that depends regionally.
That's a whole other episode we can get to, but it's like $150. But last year, this is like post-pandemic, post all this crazy inflation, $300 a month.
Just average to get where you're going to either shop or to earn money.
And that could obviously easily be higher depending on how much you drive, how much gas costs in your area. I mean, like people in California, like what are they paying? I have absolutely no idea.
Maybe to people at home, these numbers are familiar and certainly they look like they are. To me, I have not had a car in a very long time and I have not thought about this. This is truly outrageous.
Yeah. And when you think about, a car is a very complicated machine, right?
Yeah.
You and I, even though I maybe like cars a little bit more than the average, but I have no idea. You open that hood, I'm like, I guess that's
maybe
the engine.
These numbers are familiar to people, but I cannot think that the average person knows enough about their car to be maximizing any of this.
So this is another place of weakness where, mechanics can very easily overcharge people who don't know any better.
Yeah, they do to me.
Yeah, I mean, really, in my family, I'm the one who takes the cars in because my husband hates it so much. Yeah. It's kind of weird because he knows even less about cars than I do. And there's something weird for him going in as a man.
Yeah.
Not knowing something that like they get almost extra predatory when I'm like a woman and I come in and I show even like an inkling of understanding of what's going on. I feel like I'm better respected for some reason. It's very strange. And
my
weird.
signature move is to just Google in front of them, to just say, okay, I'm just going to Google that quickly. I just want to make sure. And there is a moment of panic every time because they don't usually receive my queerness with the instinct that I know what I'm talking about. So I like to be like, I know how to research.
Yeah.
Honey.
Yeah. And so you have this like perfect storm. And for people who can't afford even the most median, then what are they having to get? They're having to get the oldest, most shittiest cars that need the most maintenance. I mean, again, it's expensive to be poor and cars can be a big part of that.
Actually, on the topic of cost, let's hear more from Chris Wells about what our obsession with cars is costing us, both individually and on a society-wide scale.
Cars are really expensive. They're expensive to buy. They're expensive to maintain. They're expensive to operate. Everyone with a car is spending a great deal of money in order to be able to drive around and provide transportation for themselves and their families. For people who own cars, what they give you is much easier mobility than other forms of transportation because you can get in your car whenever you want. You can go wherever you want. And because we have built the landscape around it, it means you have a relatively simple path to wherever you want to go. And there's probably free parking at the other end. There's a thick network of cheap gas stations just about everywhere. And I know some people say, cheap, gas isn't cheap. Compare it to European prices. It's cheap. It's more expensive than it used to be, but it's in the grand scheme of things, it's cheaper than water. Go buy a gallon of water. It's likely to cost you more. So what do we get? What we get is relatively flexible, on-demand transportation. The vast majority of the expenses for which have been picked up by the public purse, right? All of those investments in a landscape that's easy for cars have already been made. So you don't have to pay for that again. It's already paid for. This is something that people don't often think about, although once you point it out, it's pretty obvious. That is that you can't really use a car unless you have an infrastructure to use it with, right? You need well-paved streets to drive on. You need highways to get places quickly. You need parking lots to be able to conveniently park and go in wherever you're trying to shop or to do whatever you're trying to do. And that means in order to have the kind of automotive society that we have, you have to spend an enormous amount of money on building the landscape to accommodate universal car use. And so if the landscape is one piece, the other piece is that we're a very wealthy nation and we've put a large amount of our discretionary consumer spending into personal transportation. If you've ever traveled to a part of the world that doesn't have the kind of car-centric culture the United States does, and you start to think about how those landscapes differ, you can begin to see what I'm talking about. But you can also think about, I don't know, say downtown Manhattan, which is not a place that's particularly accommodating to cars, even though it's jammed with them. But very few people compared to the rest of the United States actually own and operate automobiles on an everyday basis in the landscape that is downtown Manhattan. It's really inconvenient to use a car. And so even though every square inch is jammed with cars, people using them, relatively speaking, it's a very small percentage of the population who are in those cars that are jamming the available space. So what's different in other places is that we have much more space for people to operate their cars, and so many more people do. If you're thinking about the finances of all of that, what that means is if you look at this historically, the first piece of federal aid legislation for highways was passed in 1916. And so basically for the last 100 years, the federal government has allocated millions and millions and billions of dollars to the highway system. And that's before you get to state governments, which also spend a huge amount of money on roads and highways. And it's before you get to local governments, which often spend a huge amount of money, especially on maintenance of roads and highways. And that's before you get to all of the businesses and homes and apartment buildings and industries that have to follow local zoning codes that require you to have vast amounts of parking for all of the people who might want to come to take advantage of whatever it is you're selling or making or doing. And all of that just adds up to an amount of money invested in automobility and a car-centric culture that's almost impossible even to begin to tabulate.
You can charge people whatever you want when they think it's a necessity. And when you have like only a few companies as your options, it's similar to like healthcare and housing. These are costs you feel like you have to take on. And so every aspect of them can be a high pressure sales environment.
Yeah. Now, of course, you might think that you're able to quote unquote get out of this by doing something called leasing, right? I'm sure you've heard of this.
We've leased a car.
Just lease the car. Well, I have bad news for you. leasing a car is definitely always the most expensive way
Oops.
to drive a car because you have absolutely no skin in the game,
No.
right? I mean, it's truly
It's a rental.
just a pure cost. And they have very specific amounts that you're able to drive. Like, honestly, like this is what my dad told me. My dad said, you know, when you go to like these bigger car lots, what do you think makes the most money on that entire thing? It's not selling the actual cars, it's the leasing department.
Yeah.
That's where they make the most money.
I mean, when we went in and said we were thinking about leasing, like we were like, we don't know anything about cars, which of course we shouldn't have said, but we were like truly clueless and we've never done this. And the leasing stuff was pounced on us really quickly. And I noticed that, and it is what we ended up doing. And now I know that it was a mistake, but
okay.
It's
predatory.
It's hard.
It's predatory.
It's predatory. Everyone, the reason that they do it is that statistically enough people are going to fall for it, that it's really profitable for them. And it can happen to anyone.
I think and this is something that we touch on, I think, a lot in all these different things that we get into, but it's really pretty shitty when you think about it, of like that the onus is on you.
Yeah.
That you feel bad for being fleeced. Like, oh, it was really my responsibility. When no, it's other people's responsibility not to be shitty.
Yes, 100%. But I mean, a lot of car stuff reinforces the individualism of all of that.
Very much
and
so.
all of the risk is put on just your shoulders. And it's supposed to feel like your baby.
Yeah.
Even if you're leasing it.
Well, that's a big part of overall the marketing of this thing, is this idea of freedom. I mean, this is pretty amazing. It's kind of miraculous that we're in a place where at any point of my day, I can just go downstairs, get in my car, and I can go wherever I want to go.
Yeah.
At the drop of a hat in very quick order.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, even if I had a horse, like it'd take me, some days that I'd have to, think about the inn where I was going to stay. Like there's just a lot more barriers to transportation. But now we don't have
this
that.
has happened so quickly that how are we grappling with all the negative side effects? Like it's similar to like when the internet exploded or cell phones took over. There's tons of there are miracles, but there's unintended effects.
Absolutely. So like, let's kind of transition out to just like, what does it cost the individual? Let's talk about more like the cultural price that we're paying. Now, I remember when I first got behind the wheel of the car for the first time, my father looked me in the eye and kind of semi-traumatized me, but he said, "This is a killing machine. What you're getting behind the wheel of is a killing machine." And he's right. I mean, 13 car accidents occur in the US every minute.
I mean, it's like driving a giant, slightly slower bullet.
Yeah. I mean, and millions of these result in serious injury. About 4.8 million people in 2020 were seriously injured.
I was airlifted when I was 18. I just turned 18. I was airlifted from a car accident. And I look back, and at the time I felt all this shame and guilt. But the car brakes failed me because it was a used car.
Oh my
and
God.
Should I have been going as the speed I was going? It was legal, but should I have been? Probably not. But like, I was 17 when they gave it to me, 18 when this happened. Like, we put a lot of responsibility into everyone's hands.
Yeah.
For what? What? The story that we tell ourselves of driving?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure
like the romance of it?
For you, the cost is not all something that you can just show on a breakdown of like all your medical bills.
It could have been my life, but instead it was like a lot of trauma. I lost a summer of my youth. I had to get reconstructive surgery. It was a big deal, and it impacted every part of my life. And I never took the time at the time to blame anyone but myself for that.
Wow, that's horrifying. I am so sorry you went through that. I cannot imagine.
But I was lucky. A lot of people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in 2021 alone, 42,000 people in the US died in a car accident. I mean, car crashes are killing more and more people, even since the pandemic, even though the volume of traffic hasn't risen. So like US traffic deaths, is according to the Washington Post, they jumped in early 2022, hitting a 20-year high. And all but 6 states reported increases in traffic deaths from 2020 to 2021. Isn't
And
that
even if you have a
insane?
super safe car, and we have really made huge strides in safety of vehicles, it's obviously not enough to me to offset the risk, but we have made huge strides.
We have.
Even if you walk away without a scratch on you, this can devastate your finances and it will change your
Absolutely.
insurance rates.
Yes.
And it has effects on even just your comfortability driving. And I really think we don't think about the risks that we take on. We just think about the freedom and stuff when we make the decisions to become drivers at a young age.
Yeah. And I mean,
It's like deciding to do a college degree at the same time.
And I mean, it goes obviously even more beyond the death toll of just car-on-car collisions.
Yeah.
So MIT calculated that they think about 53,000 Americans die prematurely every year from vehicle pollution.
Oh my God, just from the pollution.
Yeah.
I kind of thought once we got the lead out of gas, things are fine. But then I remember now, oh yeah, these are evil predators.
Greenhouse gases. So transportation is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the US.
Yeah.
Accounts for about 27%.
That's crazy. So if we had never done this whole car craze, we would still be in this mess, but certainly not to the degree we are now.
No, definitely not. I don't think anybody would argue otherwise.
And honestly, if you think about the amount of asphalt and concrete we're putting down for highways and parking garages, I mean, that is incredibly harsh on the environment. But the costs to the planet aren't really where it stops. Even if you don't think that the world is getting warmer or don't care, you might not want to be living in the landscape creating those problems. If you've ever seen this meme, it's a classic. It says, "Kids, go play outside." Meanwhile, the outside that the parents built, and then it just shows a bunch of gas stations and Chipotles and parking lots. With that in mind, let's hear a bit more from Chris Wells.
Start in a random suburb and walk for a mile. What you're going to do is walk past people's houses. You might get to a corner store that's like a gas station or something, but you might not. Like those might be more than a mile away. And so people don't walk to do stuff, especially when it's so easy to get in a car and drive. So that has exercise implications. It has social implications because the opportunities per square mile are cultural as much as they are about buying stuff, right? It's who you see. It's what you're able to do. It's the things that are possible within walking distance. And so I would characterize those as environmental consequences, environmental differences, even though that's not the things we normally think of environmental, which is pollution and degradation and those sorts of things. But a huge parking lot is an environmental consequence of car culture. Some people love Manhattan, others hate it. Fine. But some listeners have maybe gone on vacation to a country where there's not a car-dependent culture. And it is possible to take a vacation to that place, let's just say somewhere in Europe. And you don't have to rent a car to be able to get around, do things, see the sights, do the things, enjoy your vacation. And that's one of the few times that many Americans ever experience what it's like to live in a place that's not utterly car dependent. If you enjoy going on those sorts of vacations, perhaps you can imagine what it would mean for life if we rebuilt our landscape in ways that allowed us to live that way every day, not just when we're on vacation.
This does not sound like a fun or easy transition for society, and it's going to affect a lot of people, but maybe it could be a jobs program, like rebuilding some of our landscape could employ people and help them. We certainly have the money. So roll up your sleeves, everybody. It is time for us to get to work. We have our work cut out for us.
So I will say that there's a bit of ray of sunshine in here.
Oh,
There's
please,
a little
give
bit
me
of
some hope.
that we can take away. So like this idea that all Americans are equally in love with driving, obviously, is a myth. And the majority of people, it seems like, who are driving feel like they have no choice to drive as much as they do and wish they had other options. I definitely put myself in this camp. As much as I hate freaking Elon Musk. I'm like, if you give me a proper self-driving car that I don't have to make decisions about, that I can maybe carpool with other people.
PSA, that
Right.
does not exist, and never trust any of those services. They were a lie from the beginning. They knew they were a lie. They are wildly unsafe. Maybe one day when someone else and scientists approve and there's a government regulation, maybe, but I have to warn people. But it
Thanks
sucks.
for crushing all of my dreams.
It sucks because
it's too good to be true. Is that what you're telling me?
It's way too good to be true.
Yeah, but I mean, millennials as a group, we're driving less than previous generations. And Gen Z is actually way less likely to have a driver's license than previous generations.
So I'm young.
I know. For me, I was so scared. I mean, when my parent looked at me and was like, this is a killing machine, I was terrified. And I hung out like as long as I could until my parents were like, you need, like, I am done taking you to all of these rehearsals. You need to go on your own.
Well, what's tough too is that, like, how do we personally get off of the hamster wheel of this when the whole system is working against us and encouraging us to do the opposite? We asked both our experts today this question. Here's Chris Wells to tell us a little bit about what can be done on a federal scale.
It's going to require legislative action and a change in spending priorities and investments in order to change anything. And the only people who have the power to make those changes are elected officials. My political answer is that there's a lot of cynicism. I don't think I have ever encountered political battles that are more vicious than local zoning battles. Local zoning battles are about land use and the proper government role in determining land use. All of the changes that would have to occur would have to go through local land use zoning processes, in which there are huge financial and political and lifestyle investments that are very, 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 very contentious and difficult to change. Is there a scenario where I could imagine a shift in federal priorities and policymaking that would have huge downstream implications for the way those fights play out? Absolutely. The federal government establishes infrastructure and especially highway spending. And the kinds of policies that get passed at that level have huge implications for what's possible down the ladder of federalism all the way to the local level. Those policies, because they have such enormous implication for such a wide variety of things, are incredibly contentious. So you might remember Pete Buttigieg made headlines shortly after becoming Secretary of Transportation when he said, a lot of our highways got built through African-American neighborhoods. It was incredibly disruptive and destructive, and we need to think about how to make good on that. That produced a political firestorm. Really simple and historically accurate thing to say. That is exactly what happened. Federal policy coupled with state planning resulted, show me a city and its highway map, and I'll be able to predict with uncanny accuracy where the African-American neighborhoods used to be, just by looking at the highway maps. I don't need anything else because I understand the history and how those processes unfolded. That's a reality that we have to live with. It's something that we can and should change. Does that mean we can and will? We certainly can. Will we? That's a political question.
Chris Wells is a professor of environmental studies at Macalester College, and you can find his book, Car Country and Environmental History, wherever fine books are sold. We also heard from Dave Amos. Here's what he had to say about getting involved locally.
Historically, auto-related businesses have advocated for more roads, better roads, larger roads in U.S. history, right? So car companies, tire companies, gas companies, they have all sort of banded together to really shut down the streetcars, to put bikes to the wayside, and really focus on making great experiences for drivers. This has historically been the case. Now, I am not a Washington lobbyist or in that realm. I would assume that this is still happening, at least at the federal level. So a lot of our money for roads comes from these large transportation bills that come out of Congress. And they're always tweaking the percentages, right? Which percentages goes to new road construction, maintenance, and what tiny scrap goes to active transportation like bikes and then also mass transit, right? So we're all trying to fight for the funding pie, and no doubt car companies are fighting on behalf of the drivers out there. When we're talking about fighting for folks to not have a car, in a lot of the ways we're talking about fighting for places where a car is not necessary. And in that sense, there are folks doing a lot of advocacy in that realm. And that's where we see the Yes in My Backyard, the YIMBY groups who are forming around the country in response to not my backyard folks, NIMBY groups, who are advocating for more dense housing, more mixed use, and as a result, more transit, more alternative options, the ability to walk and bike places. Now, Yes in My Backyard is, again, sort of housing focused, but I guarantee you that all those folks are just as excited about the idea of ditching their cars. So I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the grassroots activism happening, and it's been absolutely successful. You can see Governor Newsom of California at a podium where he's pronouncing, the benefits of YIMBYism. Like this is actually reaching some of the highest levels of politics. So that's where we're seeing a lot of the change. Now, there are obviously also folks who, like in New York City, the strap hangers, or like sort of transit unions, or folks who rely on transit sort of banding together to advocate for better transit. Those generally are existing in sort of bigger cities. And in smaller cities, what we're seeing is bikes becoming a great sort of way to get out of the car. They're sort of great for trips of like 1 to 4 or 5 miles, which is a lot of the trips that you'll see in the suburban areas or sort of smaller cities there. So there are clubs like cycling clubs and things like that. So yes, there are absolutely ways you can get involved. I should also mention just going to planning meetings, going to city council meetings, going to planning commission meetings. It doesn't take that many people to show up to a meeting to make a difference. And you have city planners who want to actually do this stuff, right? The average city planner sitting in a planning office wants walkable, bikeable, sustainable communities. What they're up against in a lot of cases is a city council elected by people who are used to cars and don't see a reason to change. But give planners an excuse to put that kind of stuff in city plans and advocate at city council, they'll jump on it. So many ways to get involved. It's not a vaguely blue thing. And in fact, the federal government in a lot of ways doesn't have a whole lot of say in how cities are planned. In terms of our constitutional system, there's the word city doesn't appear in our constitution. It's state and it's local in a lot of ways. So getting involved in some ways is more accessible and concrete than other issues.
Dave Amos is an assistant professor at the Department of City and Regional Planning at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, as well as the producer of City Beautiful, a YouTube channel about cities and city planning that I love and you should go check out right now. But there's got to be more we can do, right?
There are, movements towards sort of collective car ownership and access. So there's a huge inefficiency and wasted potential because most cars, they sit there for 90% of the day, right? And so there's lots of new companies and kind of approaches are cropping up to try and deal with this. So obviously you have, Uber and Lyft. Mm-hmm. They have their own issues, but there's also Zipcar and Car2Go. I use Turo a lot, which is kind of like the Airbnb for cars. I've actually loved it. I've had just personally really good experiences with it. And I mean, again, these are not perfect companies, but it is clear.
Patches for a really
something is changing. I mean, even Audi, they have this thing called Audi on demand now where you can just show up and
take an Audi.
Yeah, just take an Audi, and it's the same price as getting through something through Hertz or whatever. I mean, the rental car market as a whole is definitely shifting.
A whole separate episode.
I've thought about e-bike ownership and stuff. But again, like it's that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of like where I live.
You can't.
There are no, like between me and the nearest HEB, which is our most amazing grocery store in the world. Got a shout out HEB.
Not sponsored.
Not sponsored, but please sponsor us. I love you, HEB. But like there's not a protected bike lane the whole way. There isn't. And here I am next to freaking Ford F-150s, every
safe.
other car. It's really not safe.
But I feel like if we could find ways for people to drive, to be required to drive less if they don't want to, maybe a lot of people would actually enjoy driving more. And especially if it was safer and we could get a lot of people who don't want to be doing this off the street, it could be a much more enjoyable experience. My husband loves to drive. We have a car that we ended up with because my father-in-law passed away and we had leased it for him. So now we're stuck with it for a little bit while we're getting rid of it. But he loves to drive. But he doesn't love it when it's like a daily thing. Like if he is to commute for an hour every day.
Yeah, when you have to do something, that's a great way to make it not fun.
Yeah. So even people who love cars, there could be huge benefits for driving culture if we were to make it less shoved into every corner of everyone's life.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think if you personally like want to try and make a difference, I mean, individually, there's not like a whole lot you can do. Obviously, like, buy a physically smaller car if you can, and share. Just being able to share a car can make an impact. But the thing that's really going to move the needle on this is in the policy realm. It just is.
Yeah.
So I really like this quote by Scott Griffin, who's the CEO of Zipcar, that like maybe gave me like a little bit of a shred of hope. So he said, quote, "Policymakers should also take notice and accept that our youngest generation will not think about transportation the way we have for the last 100 years, nor will future generations. Our most forward-looking policymakers are thinking about housing, land use, highways, bridges, and gas taxes like it's 2015 rather than 1971. Obviously, this quote's from 2015. And then he goes on to say, "It is my hope that these thought leaders will inspire a broader dialogue on mobility policy instead of sticking with an outdated transportation policy that directs limited funds almost exclusively towards highways."
And that is from the CEO of Zipcar. So
yeah, I know, right?
That's our note to end it, I think.
I agree. Well, thanks for hanging with us this episode. We'll see you
thanks
again.
for cruising on by.
That's right.
We'll see you next time on Too Good to Be True. And remember, subscribe to the Society at TFD. Bye.
Bye.
Well, that's the show for this season.
You can find Too Good to Be True wherever podcasts are available. And while you're there, we'd love for you to rate the show and leave us a review. I've been Ryan Houlihan, and you can find me on all social media at Ryan Houlihan or on my personal YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Ryho. That's at RYHO.
I've been Julia Lorenz Olson. You can find me on YouTube at my PBS show 2 Cents. And every once in a while, I'll look at Instagram. My handle is at YayIt'sJulia.